My name is Jorge Guajardo. I'll be moderating this panel. With me today we have Dan, Adam, Jake, and Guy. Thank you all so much for coming. By way of introduction, Dan Magy, co-founder and CEO of Firestorm Labs, San Diego-based defense tech company developing low-cost drones with distributed additive manufacturing. Prior to Firestorm, Dan co-founded Citadel Defense, a counter-drone company that was acquired by Blue Halo in 2021. He began his career as an analyst in the agency and holds degrees from UCLA and the London School of Economics, where he studied as a Marshall Scholar.
I'm not an analyst in the agency.
No, started, no longer.
No, I'm
no longer.
Okay.
Yeah, no, not an analyst in the agency.
Your cover's been blown, Dan.
Adam Warmoth is founder and CEO of Chariot Defense, a defense tech company pioneering next-gen battlefield power distribution systems. Adam previously led engineering for counter-UAS systems at Anduril and served as head of product at Archer Aviation. Chariot's Amphora platform provides modular, high-voltage, and low-signature power at the tactical edge. The company raised $8 million in seed funding led by General Catalyst and XYZ Ventures and has already deployed systems with the U.S. military in operational exercises. He has a BS and MS from Stanford, where he was captain of the varsity water polo team. Jake is a managing director at Mark Ventures, an early-stage VC firm focused on defense and dual-use technologies. Prior to founding Mark, Jake served as the managing director of the Army Venture Capital Corp., where he ran the venture arm of the Department of Defense. A former attorney, Jake holds a BS and JD from UC Berkeley. And Guy Filippelli is a managing partner of Squadra Ventures, an early-stage venture capital firm making concentrated lead investments in national security and cybersecurity companies. A former U.S. Army intelligence officer, Guy earned the National Intelligence Medallion in 2007. Guy previously founded and led Barico Technologies and Red Owl Analytics. He is a West Point graduate and holds an MA from the University of Oxford. Thank you all so much for being here. To start, I want to talk about this concept of the tactical edge and building technology specifically for the warfighter at the edge. And if you all could speak a little bit about what the specific constraints that come from building for that environment and for that customer look like.
Start, man?
Yeah.
Yeah, so one of the great phrases I've heard recently is that war is always an away game, okay? And what does that mean? You're going to use what you have at your disposal. And so when you build things at the tactical edge, at least how we see the world, is you're always going to have centralized manufacturing, but decentralized manufacturing, and it doesn't need to just be 3D printing, but advanced manufacturing processes that can be modular and you can move them around. What that allows the end user to do is fix things, build things, prototype things, and basically adapt to their enemy. Right? The days of the global war on terror, where we had supremacy on the air and on the sea, are probably gone. The Ukrainian war has shown us how a lot of these legacy technologies are not holding up in environments where we're facing tens of thousands of PhDs in machine learning who are building AI algorithms that can build weapons against us. So we have to be able to adapt in real time to what our needs. And I think that if you don't have that flexibility, you might have the ability to carry out warfare for a short amount of time, but sustaining it and then adapting as the game changes, you're in trouble.
Yeah, we've been kind of trying to think about the edge, trying to define this from a little bit more of a first principles. Everyone's kind of talking about the edge is important. Why is that important? Why is that different from what we've been doing for the past 30 years? We kind of think about the case of platoon forward deployed needs to go see over that next hill. And why they need all these capabilities organically today. It's the way that they used to do that is they'd call back to the rear support area, right? They'd launch a drone from a runway, fixed wing drone, would come overhead, would stream down 30 frames per second, full motion video, and they would know what's on the other side. In kind of modern conflict and what we're seeing in Ukraine, every link in that chain has been disrupted. So that callback is going to get them triangulated and targeted. That runway has been destroyed that they'd be launching that fixed wing asset from. If they do get that asset overhead, the enemy has cheap interceptors to shoot it down. And if they do get any time on station, the video link down to that device is getting jammed. And so all of the link in the chain that allowed us to project relatively kind of small forces forward and have that big rear support is breaking down. And so you need to actually push capabilities that traditionally you relied on that rear support area. You need to push those things forward. So now these units need their own ISR, they need their own electronic warfare, their own air defense and counter-UAS, things that they traditionally didn't have to bring with them because they could rely on that rear support. And that's creating big challenges. It's creating challenges around power. It's creating challenges around comms. It's creating challenges around compute, repair, things that you traditionally could kind of rely on that rear support for, that in this decentralized, large-scale combat operations type fight, the game has just completely changed. And so you have to build technologies, new technologies for the edge.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, as an investor, when I think about building for the tactical edge, it's really all about getting real customer feedback for the thing you're building, right? So if you're two graduate students here at the business school or Stanford GSB students and you're going to create a SaaS company, it's very easy to get customer feedback, know how your product's being used, know where it works, know why it doesn't work, and adapt it over time. If you are building small drones for a Ukraine use case or for an Indo-Pacific use case, like how are you going to get that real-world feedback from the tactical edge? Highly recommend Dan's podcast, Drone Wars. If you watch his podcast, you will see that the
Great
technology.
Thank you.
Yeah, he's also a portfolio company, so I'll say lots of good things about him, but only because he's trying to make me money. But what's happening in Ukraine is like changing incredibly fast at the tactical edge, and so if you are an American company trying to build for any of those use cases and you are not at the edge often and seeing what's working and what's not working and how things are changing, then you have zero chance of being competitive in the global market.
Don't disagree with anything that's been said. Maybe I'll add, I think one of the hard things right now is trying to define, to recognize that there's a lot of different tactical edges right now and that they're very different than each other. And we as a nation tend to have a habit to pick one and go all in on it and then think that all future edges are going to look like the one that we're currently in. So like right now, for example, the tactical edge in Ukraine is very different than the tactical edge in the Pacific, is very different than the tactical edge in Iran, is very different than the tactical edge on the southern border, is very different than the tactical edge in Venezuela, is very different than the tactical edge in someplace in Africa. And
isn't Venezuela now the southern border?
Yeah, I'm not sure. So these are very bespoke kinds of circumstances, and it's a policymaker's challenge to figure out what to resource in some ways, but all those places are different. And I definitely agree with the comment of like it's not like Iraq and Afghanistan. I mean, there's no question there. And for what it's worth, we did have air superiority. We did have the spectrum superiority. We did have, frankly, full access to all the infrastructure, just at a sort of geopolitical level. And by the way, we had no great powers in our way. Mm-hmm. So very different playground. And so, yeah, I think you got to take all that into account as well. But I'll just double down on the feedback loops too. If you're not building with the user very tightly aligned, then you're going to be in a lot of trouble.
When it comes to building with the user and being tightly aligned and getting feedback that actually helps scale your product, do you almost need things to break when you ship them first? And how do you go about shipping very quickly, understanding that not everything might work the first time around, while still also building trust and that your product is something that people are going to want to use that will work in the future?
Yeah, let me tell the story first about Citadel. This was like 10 years ago. We were a counter-UAS system for sports stadiums. That's where we built the original thesis. And then Naval Special Warfare found our stuff and took it to Iraq, and we were the second system in Mosul. No one on our team had ever sold anything to the government before. And they're in Iraq, right? So they'd be using these systems, and we'd basically have to run our WhatsApp number in shifts so that when something didn't work, they would give us feedback. And I mean, this is 10 years ago, and this will sound crazy, but we actually had to burn updates to our algorithm on CDs or put them on USB drives. We had to hand them, we had to go down to Coronado, hand them to them, and then to fly them, and then go system to system to plug it in. But we made the decision, because we had a 70 to 80% solution, which was better than anything they had at that point, that even though it wasn't perfect, the end user was like unbelievably receptive to that, and they worked with us like over months while we were using these things against ISIS to like figure out what was working. Dude, this antenna was terrible. Like, can you send us 10 more antennas? We will go test them for you. Like, we know this. Hey, we're getting false positives in urban environment. How do we fix it? Like, so I think we get a little bit scared sometimes when you think about like the military testing and breaking something that you build. But what I've found, at least over the last decade, is they're substantially more receptive to working with you to get your solutions up to where they need it than you might think. And a lot of times, frankly, they just, if they're talking to you, that means they probably don't have a tool to do a job they really need to do, right?
Yeah, one of the lessons I learned at Anduril did this model as well, right? Ship the 80% solution. What I think especially the shift coming from traditional Silicon Valley companies to serving defense market is you have to be very clear about the limitations of your product. You can ship the 80% solution, but you need to tell them exactly how and when and where it's going to fail, and then they're willing to accept that and take that, right? If you kind of try to kind of fake it till you make it and pretend like everything's great and then like hope that they don't come across that edge case that that it's going to fail in, and then it fails in that, now you're in excuse mode, and you don't want to be excuse mode when you're getting yelled at by like a sergeant major who's like, you told me this thing was going to work and it didn't. So these people accept risk that's what they do that's their job, right? Is accept risk, manage risk, make mitigations, right? Yeah. So you have to tell them, here's what it does, here's what it doesn't do. And it's not necessarily natural from kind of the Silicon Valley, fake it till you make it model. But you have to be very clear about the limitations and work with the right customers. And so working with NSW, they're going to be willing to lean forward and kind of take that. We are seeing some transition, in the broader conventional forces. So working with the Army today versus working with the Army, 5 years ago at Anduril, you are seeing an embracing of risk and embracing of this. And that's starting with the Army Transformation Initiative, all the way up from Honorable Driscoll to General George. To me, the big change there is when they go to these rotational training centers and they're going, and General George is coming for the DV day and he's talking to that brigade commander, what they're evaluating now is not just how did you perform against OPFOR, it is how are you modernizing, how are you embracing new technology. And so that's creating incentives for them to go bring in new technology, and then that's letting companies that have imperfect solutions come and be in that environment without worry that, hey, if this fails, I'm going to get blackballed.
One thing to add, they will break your stuff. Yeah. Like, they absolutely will, and it will be really dumb usually how it happens, but like you'll find your edge cases like very, very quickly. So if you're building for DoD, expect everything to be broken.
Especially for the Marines, right?
Yeah. They might try and eat it, actually. So.
I mean, I'll add one thing to that too. I think there's, just to recognize though, there's a couple things. There's a cost to experiencing that breakage, and that cost is different in different use cases. Meaning you only have so many, you need to know how many shots on goal you truly have. Mm-hmm. And you can over-rotate on that. And we're just, sorry, you're out. We're moving on to something. You lose their mind, you lose their trust, and you're screwed. Yeah. Number two, the thing that I guess I've learned is to give an end user something new, you have to go past incremental change. Because there's a cost to any kind of change as well. So you have to be, I think the way that you generate trust and you generate maneuver space to bring new technology to somebody is you truly do make the case that you're about to give them transformational leap in capability. They are much more likely to give you the time and space to innovate and fail and innovate if they know that the leap is transformational. If it's incremental, you're in a lot of trouble with that mentality. Now, and by the way, that's not to say that everything always needs to be transformational. There's lots of use cases, especially in this world, where a little bit of incremental improvement can be a great business, but in that case, you better not screw it up. You're probably getting one shot. So I just think that's an important distinction. One other just quick comment on like the evolution of the military thinking over the last 20 years. I'm the old guy in the room, at this point, which is, but 20 years ago, I think this mentality was still there, just to be fair, and I don't, it just took lots of different forms. And now there's a whole new set of players and there's a whole new set of people involved, and we definitely have much stronger senior level buy-in for sure. But I do believe that the military ecosystem, for the last 200 years in this country has been one of innovation and technology development and figuring out new stuff and breaking it and breaking it and breaking it and then evolving it. So I kind of am more of the optimist historically, and I also don't think that we're living in in other words, I actually don't think that we're in our own golden age right now of military innovation. I'm a little bit of a skeptic, but it's good to feel like that too sometimes.
What would you say the golden age of military innovation?
I think we've always been, like, in other words, I think the military especially has always been, especially in this country, since its founding, has been about innovating and new challenges and breaking through the rules and the walls and going back to the history of the United States military, from tanks to planes to paratroopers to long-range weapons to all those. There were all these technological innovations in the history of the U.S. military, which took a bunch of guys and women at the edge figuring out how to do something that they'd never done before with stuff that kind of wasn't designed to do that. And that's one of the cool things about, I think one of the cool things for people in this room, like, to think about why you shouldn't discount, if I was 19, 20, 21, why I might consider spending a few years. One thing we don't normally talk about in these scenarios is, you really want to be awesome in this ecosystem? Go do it for a few years and live it.
Yeah, I mean, if you don't have a co-founder or someone very senior in your team who's in the military, you're not going to build a product that they're going to be able to use. Just full stop. That's what we've found. There's plenty of people in the military that talk to you, but people have actually used it and understand, like, how does this tie to doctrine? How do I deploy with this, right? And again, they will break your stuff. Like, it's super important. I mean, we did that on our founding team on purpose, right? And when you have, like, the pilot light's not on forever. Do you know what I mean? But if you get somebody who's out and you kind of can build the feedback loop for, like, what they think and the people they can talk to give you ideas on the product, you'll have a superior advantage over almost everyone else.
Yeah, to your point, Guy, about the golden age of defense innovation not necessarily being today, that's always been there's a through line. I think, how many people here have read Steve Blank's History of Silicon Valley? You should read it. It's a great sort of story about how Silicon Valley was really driven by the Department of Defense. A lot of people use that story to sort of harken back and say, we were great once, we could do this once, we can do it again. But really, if you go back and you read, like, Vannevar Bush's biography and Tuxedo Park, the story of Alfred Loomis, and all of the people who came together right before World War II, the history of RAND and DARPA as they were getting stood up, you will see that while that was in some sense a golden age of innovation, they all fought the exact same fights that you as new defense innovators have to fight. There were entrenched interests who hated the innovation push that Vannevar Bush was making and didn't want him to do certain things, and he had to go and get, executive level approval to override some admiral to get it done. It's the exact same fights that you're fighting today, they had to fight back then. And the optimistic part of that story is they fought that fight and then they were successful. And so you can be too, but it's not going to be easy.
And you need a lobbyist.
And one thing I always tell, like, our entrepreneurs, and even just, when I say, like, before you kind of bitch about the bureaucracy around you, the true thing is, like, the world is a very mediocre place, right? It really is.
Full of mediocre
And by the
people.
way, again, speaking to young people in this room, be prepared to be surrounded by mediocrity for many years to come. I used to say somebody told me once I was perpetually disappointed by the human race that surrounded me, but that is the opportunity to be great, is the point of that, right? So the only reason you get to be called a, quote, innovator is because you are rising up around that sea of mediocrity I don't care if you're in the DoD world, I don't care if you're in the enterprise software world, if you're in the consumer app, your ability to build and execute something great is because of that. And that's human. That's so more fundamental than defense. That's what should inspire you to the next 50 years of your professional life.
Right on. Dan, I want to come back to what you mentioned about how things are just going to break, and specifically through the lens of product delivery. There's a spectrum between, here's a box, it's yours, let us know how it is, and we have a forward deployed model, we're going to be embedded with you, we're going to run the system. How do you think about one versus the other? Is it product dependent? Is it customer dependent? Just any of your thoughts there?
Well, I mean, you got to give it when you're bringing new products into the market, you got to give it white glove service, right? GA, Anduril, all these companies, that's one of the things they always do is like kind of embed people with the products. 1 to learn, 1 to adapt, 2 to adapt, and then 3 to help fix things as it breaks, so you can almost teach them. I'll tell you guys a little bit of a story. So for background, we're a distributed manufacturing company, but we didn't start that way. We started as a modular drone company, and the thesis was, why are we buying one drone for one mission? You should buy one drone that has software that then you can modify for whatever mission you want. We then got a call 18 months ago from some friends in northern Iraq at a FOB we don't talk about that said basically they used all their loitering munitions. Could you put your 3D printers in a box and send it to us? We don't have these desktop 3D printers you're all thinking about. Ours are the size of a car, made by HP. They use this technology called multi-jet fusion, where it's a powder-based printer, and you can just, you need about, 50 to 100 of the small ones to get one of the big ones. So we spent a ton of money figuring out how to put this in a box. We took it to an event that's coming up shortly in the desert in California called PCC5, okay? And day one, we crashed our drone, and literally the Army evaluators came over to us and slapped us on the back and said, "It's awesome, guys. Pack it up. We'll see you. We'll see you next year." We're like, no. We will have this bird in the air in 24 hours. And we 3D printed 70% of the bird that had been broken, and it was in the air. That day, okay, that people saw the Frankenstein drone come back to life, we printed parts for 15 other people's companies, okay? And what we figured out, and I'm telling you this whole story, is that sometimes when you take things into the field with the end user, you uncover what could end up being our Slack moment, if you will, because if you guys all know, Slack was built as an internal communication tool. The DoD does not have a Pep Boys or AutoZone, all right? And so when you give them an industrial grade 3D printer that can print stuff that I'm not saying can replace, but that is sufficient to hold that, for steel parts, carbon fiber parts, we are printing stuff in the field where, you might have an 8-month delay to get a part for a Bradley fighting vehicle. We're printing that and getting the thing back in the field. So the aperture of the business, because we actually embedded ourselves with the customer, has dramatically increased for us to the point now where we roadshow this thing across bases around America. And we now have databases of hundreds of parts that soldiers have invented, okay, because they didn't have this technology before that saves them money, or has unbelievably long lead time items that is keeping, in some cases, it depends on what part of the military you want, 50% of our legacy vehicles down. And I am not talking about some $20,000 widget. I'm literally talking about $200 parts, $50 parts. It is incredible. So the lesson here for everyone is when you embed, go in eyes wide open and listen to your customer, because they might actually give you the next great idea.
How is right to repair a barrier for you guys, or are you finding?
Is Dan Driscoll, him and his lawyers can come fight that for us in the audience? No, I mean the reality is, and we talked about this with the very first question, obviously there's the government-owned stuff, there's the company-owned stuff, and then there's stuff that's kind of created or open sourced. But what we have seen, and Dan Driscoll's talked about this, he's literally, if something breaks and it takes me 8 months and I can't get a vehicle into combat, I will see you in court because I'm going to 3D print it, right? It didn't make it into NDAA 26. I will tell you there is a lot of support for that for NDAA 27. What did make it in last year, which is really important, is the DoD has to buy 1 million additively manufactured parts. And I think that's a good step in the right direction. Because if you saw some of the stuff we're printing, guys, like you would go to AutoZone and buy this in 5 minutes, and they're waiting 7 months. It is completely unacceptable.
So right to repair, for folks in the audience who don't know, is the DoD has a bunch of contracts with suppliers with clauses in those contracts that do not allow the DoD to repair their own equipment. They have to get the contractor to repair that equipment. And the lead times can be egregious, and the price of those parts doubly so.
And half the companies are just out of business, too, that made these parts.
Yeah. And I want to use that piece to kind of talk about the white glove, the embedded beneath the customer, right? Where you said the contractor has to be forward there fixing it. And so I think what you have to be careful for, and what we've really tried to do, is make sure that when we're doing our forward deployed engineering, right, when we're going forward and embedding with the customer, that we're doing it to learn, right? And we're doing it to kind of train on tactics and train on kind of concepts of deployment. But the system itself needs to be, ready to drop into any Lance Corporal, right, and any specialist, and they just can figure it out. Because you're not going to be there to train them into PACOM. Like rule number 1 of new equipment training, like the guys you train are not the guys who end up using the equipment. You can't rely on a model that, and I think the kind of forward deployed engineering model, the downsides and the risks of that is that you now become, the product is dependent on you being there. And it lets you kind of have this crutch. And so, we've designed a system, it's got one switch on it. We've actually stripped a bunch of data on our display away to like just show what they need. We have 6 active demonstrations going on right now with 0 Chariot personnel there supporting them, where we've actually handed this off to the customer. The early days, it was incredibly important. I spent 3 weeks living out of the Hampton Inn in Leesville, right? Embedding with the customer at JRTC. But then you have to be able to make sure that you're not using that as a crutch for actually supporting and sustaining your product. So that's kind of the balance. You got to get in there with them, learn their use cases, right? Use that to inform your product requirements, but not get into a point where what we were dealing with, and to your kind of point around Iraq and Afghanistan, the FSR support model, which is not going to work in Indo-PACOM.
Right.
And Guy, I know you talked about how we tend to look at edges as one edge that we go all in on, and I know you mentioned Ukraine as one. I think the conflict in Ukraine and potentially also the Red Sea has sort of created this buzzword in defense the past 3 or 4 years, which is attritable mass. Are we over-indexing on this idea of swinging our production to attritable mass? Is that really the future of defense? Jake, I know you have thoughts on this. Would love to start with you.
Yeah, this was my plant question because it's one of my it's a soapbox I have, so I'll just be honest.
That's true.
Who's familiar with the offset strategies? We've had 3. Raise your hand if you know what the offset strategies are. Okay, so really quickly, overarching theory behind an offset strategy is you have an adversary who is strong in a certain way, maybe stronger than you collectively, but we have an offset strategy that then gives us leverage over them. So the first offset was nuclear weapons. It was to offset the Soviet Union. They were willing to throw more men into the Fulda Gap than we were and had way more tanks, more production. We had nuclear weapons. It's also why the U.S. never had a no first use nuclear policy, because we were theoretically willing to nuke the Russians coming into Europe. Second offset, Assault Breaker 2, was precision-guided weapons, right? So these are Tomahawk cruise missiles, laser-guided bombs, those sorts of things. So it's using fewer bombs to have more effects. I don't remember what the numbers are right now, but like the B-52 today filled with precision-guided weapons is something like 10,000 times more efficient than a Vietnam or Korea era bomber because of precision-guided munitions. What do those 2 things have in common? Well, the U.S. spent 70 to 80 years trying to figure out how to avoid mass using offsets, using precision weapons and nuclear weapons. Third offset was theorized by Deputy Secretary of Defense Bob Work, sort of like mid-early 2000s. Sort of touched on autonomy, really was this weird amorphous concept of like policies and innovating faster. It wasn't really a technology base. I would say we have lost the race to the third offset. The third offset was affordable, attritable mass. China beat us to it. We can catch up, right? It'll be very expensive, very challenging. We're trying to do it. Guys like Dan, guys like Adam are working hard on it. But what happens if we catch up? Well, it's not an offset. We've just sort of caught up. And then we're fighting our adversaries force on force. And I can tell you, we do not want to be fighting China force on force unless you want to lose a whole lot of your friends. And kids, I certainly don't. So I think we need to be looking for the fourth offset, And we need to be looking for the fourth offset as quickly as we can. And I think if we're leveraging American strength isn't in mass and throwing bodies at the problem. It is in technology and innovation. And so I think, this is why it's my soapbox, we might over-index a little bit too hard on affordable attritable mass. And I want people to keep working on pushing the boundaries of physics and chemistry and being smarter about what we're doing, finding the high leverage tools like precision weapons, like nuclear weapons for the next fight.
Yeah, and when it comes to taking lessons from conflicts like Ukraine and the Red Sea and all these current edges that we have, how do we take that and extrapolate that to a conflict that hasn't happened yet? And I know the big one there would be, say, the Indo-Pacific, but how do we forecast what technologies and what capabilities we are going to need at that time?
Yeah, I think that's where what Dan's doing, what we're doing is really trying to invest in these infrastructure layers effectively. Like it is impossible that we do not need more manufacturing at the edge, right? What we're manufacturing, right, is going to change based on the conflict, based on the conditions. But if we're in a contested environment, the ability to push that forward is undoubtedly valuable. And actually, the way that they're designing it is incredibly flexible, right, and meant to be able to adapt rapidly to a changing environment. We're doing the same with power. We're building this universal power layer. We are absolutely going to need more electrons distributed to the edge. The world is moving towards much more reliance on autonomous systems, electronic warfare, edge compute, sensors, directed energy, right? All of those things that need power at the edge. And so I think that the good bets in this space are, hey, how do we build those infrastructure layers that aren't overfit to any specific conflict, aren't overfit to any specific environment? And I think those infrastructure layers are power, it's compute, it's communications, it's manufacturing, it's these things that are going to be fundamental in any kind of conflict.
Something on Ukraine, as just a couple perspectives on it. I had dinner a couple weeks ago with a very senior Ukrainian official, and it was really insightful for me. We all know what's happening at that edge, that particular edge. 175 brigades at the edge in Ukraine right now. You know how many infantry soldiers there are as part of those 175 brigades? Less than 30,000, right? What did the U.S. Army just do? What was one of our big moves this year? Reconstitute the 11th Airborne. My grandfather served in World War II. Very inconsistent. Right? We just recreated a parachute, an airborne brigade or airborne division. So very interesting, right? So in some ways we're still making moves that are kind of inconsistent with what's happening at the edge, that edge. But here's another one. Here's what we haven't seen yet in Ukraine. We haven't seen really anything, and this was, at least what I took from the conversation. Haven't seen a lot of cyber in Ukraine, back and forth. So, you want to talk about real, disconnected from the kind of the physics of the battlefield. We haven't seen that. We haven't seen a lot of space stuff in Ukraine. We haven't seen a lot of, beyond little bits of it. We haven't really seen it become kind of a directed energy space in really any way at scale. Yep. So I think it could be very dangerous. It could be very dangerous to by the way, we've seen a lot of air autonomy. We haven't seen a lot of ground autonomy. We know that. We saw a lot of sea autonomy, but now they're not going to do much more of that because there's no more ships to take out. So
effective sea autonomy.
Yeah. But as you think about the implications for them, there's definitely going to be a lot of people over-indexing on things that they are seeing right now in Ukraine that are not necessarily indicative of what we're going to see 20 years from now somewhere else. And what's interesting is, again, what we're always continually and perpetually wrong about is where the next edge is. Everybody, if we all raise our hand, would say China. And I probably would make money if we would short that with where, and so
Poly market, Civil War II,
right?
Syria.
Yeah,
is that where we're going?
Okay. But my point is, and I'm not even sure. again, I'm not even sure Polymarket figures it out because I really do believe it's the unknown unknown. And that's the hard part.
Yeah, that's great. When you're thinking about portfolio support as an investor, I think for a lot of venture capitalists, portfolio support and how they support their portfolio companies is a massive differentiator that they tout, when vying for a place on a cap table. How do you think about that in defense? What does good portfolio company support look like when you're dealing mostly with dual use and defense-first companies?
There's only two things that at the end of the day matter in portfolio support. And one of them probably matters more than the other in the short term. One is helping entrepreneurs build good companies. And two is generating revenue and pipeline for them. And the latter in the short term, whether we believe it or not, is always more important in the sense that, or at least the only thing we'll ever get credit for. That's a harsh realization of kind of reality. So what we just try to do is we try to help them generate momentum in the business. And if we can just stay focused on that as investors, I would think that the founders will respect that and respect us. But I'd also ask the founders, actually, I'd be more interested in the founder perspective than the investor perspective on what does good support for portfolio support feel like.
Yeah, I'll do a little aside here to build on what you said, and then come back to that. Like, I think there's some parallels here that the government should take from what you just said as well, right? Where there's a lot of offices that exist to help you navigate, and help you kind of get into like a parking lot demo, right, and all these things. And what we actually want is contracts, right? And we actually want is sales, and not R&D and funding, but like purchasing the systems that we're building, like exchange of money for goods and services. And so like I think there's a model there that the U.S. government can take, and what the U.S. does well, right? When we are competing against centrally planned economies is like leverage the power of capitalism and just like buy things that you want. So I think there's a model, like a parallel there for how the U.S. government should think about their job as a kind of portfolio manager of these defense companies. In terms of like what we look for on our cap table is certainly support for hiring, connection to other portfolio companies. A lot of Dan and I's business is a lot of B2B, right? Even though we're in the defense sector, a lot of our revenue is going to be coming working with other companies, and so those kind of connections between portfolio companies can be very useful. I've got some other stuff you want to mention.
Who's a VC here? Raise your hand. Okay, put your hand down if you have a keep your hand up if you have a security clearance. All right, let's start with that. Okay, if you're going to invest in this space, you got to get into the rooms with the end users and understand that. You got to show up to the events, right? I'm telling you, the folks in the DoD, everyone thinks VC is sexy, so leverage that and get access to people, because you would be shocked how many times folks basically are like, I did not know this technology exists, right? That is literally the reason why I started a podcast. We don't talk about our company, we talk about everyone else in the space for a reason. And that is because we need to reinforce to the customer that there are other options besides buying something from Raytheon or Lockheed. Lockheed's on my cap table. But it's super important, okay? We are starting to see kind of the wheels start to move, but that's what I would say. Like, VCs, leverage who you are and who you work with and like the sexiness of your job, and go build relationships with end users that will help your portcos.
Dan, I know specifically you've talked about how partnering with primes can be extremely helpful for a lot of these defense tech startups, especially if you do it correctly. What does doing it correctly look like?
I think it's about leveraging the strengths you have and the strengths they have. So we've done some IRAD contracts with Lockheed where we've basically built a product, and then we went and shipped it or tried to sell it to a customer. Booz Allen, I got a bunch of my investors from Booz here. We're now working with both using their access into the Pacific, right? But also they have, like, if you're one of these big primes, you have access in offices across the country that might not know you exist. So basically turning them into a spokesperson for you, and being able to show tangible like products that you can demo with them just basically gives that end user, which is going to have a lot more salespeople than you do, more arrows in their quiver to shoot. So that's how I've seen it work quite effectively. The other thing here too, I'll just say, the question you should ask is like, how do you not get squished by the big guys? Last time we got squished by the big guys, okay? A prime basically, we raised $11 million from Lightspeed in 2017 when no one was doing defense tech. A prime then got $700 million of your taxpayer dollars to copy what we built, okay? And it, of
Which
course,
prime? Any names?
No, I'm not saying, but it's on a lot of Navy boats now, and frankly, like it's not as good. And I know it's not as good because we won SOCOM program of record and we protected a lot of the big white buildings here in DC. We did not have an 800-pound gorilla on our side to turn on last time. And so part of the strategy for this time was go get a Lockheed, go get a Booz, go get people who were, if I have a problem, I can turn on their army to help me, right? Super important.
Very smart.
When it comes to
Punch enough times,
whether a capability is built by a prime or by a startup, where do primes have the advantage and where do startups have the advantage? I know that's a relatively vague question, but why, if you raise X amount of money and then a prime comes in with 100x that to build the same thing, where is the incentive for startups to come in and say, hey, primes aren't doing this, we're the best to do it and we're better? Is it just, hey, we're faster, we're leaner, or is there something structural?
I'll use that as an example, and then I'd love Adam, who worked at Neoprime, his advice too while it was scaling, right? But just because we lost the Navy on that, we won Naval Special, we won NSW, but we lost Big Navy, doesn't mean we did not lose Army, okay? So there are a lot of customers in this space. And so just because you lose one part of it doesn't mean like there's not enough seats at the table to like go win in other places.
That's a really good point. Like we get asked all the time, what happens if the DoD doesn't buy from your company, right? You have one customer. I'm like, we don't have one customer. We have 3,000 customers. There's tons of offices across the services, all the agencies. Most of them don't talk to each other. The ones that do talk to each other don't like each other. Like
they hate each other.
Yeah.
It's unbelievable.
It's an industry.
Yep.
It just happens to be under one umbrella and all taxpayer funded.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think where startups have a good shot, and like should you start a defense tech company, right? Like, or should this just be built at a prime? It really has to be you're leveraging a commercial innovation that's going to let you kind of move faster and kind of bring in the talent. Like if you're going to go compete on like just pure R&D on like these like really hard like chemistry and physics right problems and like material science problems, like you're gonna have a really hard time if you're competing in the R&D space. And so what we've been able to do, and I think you can draw some parallels to what Dan's doing, I think you can even draw some parallels to like Palantir and Anduril. Taking a commercial innovation and created by hundreds of billions of dollars of commercial investment, and then through good forward deployed engineering, right, good go-to-market, through embedding with the customer, bring that into the defense market. Palantir did it with the investment in cloud compute infrastructure, right? Started with basically credit card fraud algorithms, and then say, hey, we're going to be the ones to do this and bring this to the department, where all that innovation's been happening in Silicon Valley and kind of at these commercial companies, not in the traditional defense industrial base. The key unlock on the initial Anduril Sentry Tower was a computer vision model. Like slew-to-queue sensors was not a new concept, but the ability to actually embed and run an NVIDIA GPU on there and run a computer vision model was the result of hundreds of billions of dollars of investment from the self-driving car industry. What we're doing at Chariot is taking all the advantages of all the innovation coming out of Tesla, coming out of Apple, Archer, Joby, Lucid, Rivian, all stuff happening completely outside of the defense industrial base. We can kind of punch above our weight by kind of taking advantage of those supply chains, all that commercial R&D investment, and just be the company that is kind of native with that technology and can bring that into the department faster. So I think you have to have kind of a theory of victory if you're going to go start a defense company and go up against the primes on why you have a unique right to win, and not just that you think you've got a group of young patriotic smart people. Like you got to have a differentiator. That's a lot of times going to be based on your experience in the commercial world.
I think you also have to be careful of like, or at least aware of, for the big primes, how often are they putting their very best people on something? Right. I mean, that's what to me, like when they're kind of when they're at their most dangerous in a good way for the world, is like, Because at the end of the day, they have brilliant people in these places, and there's very impressive people, and you see that when some of them leave because we have a company, Primordial Labs, Lee Ritholtz and Adrian Pope, who are at Lockheed, Skunkworks, and were they, when they were at Lockheed, were they any less capable that now they're at Primordial? Because if you think about the logic that you use, they're the prim crime, they're not that good, we're better. Then as soon as they leave, these guys are awesome. They were, so you have to recognize like they were amazing then, they're amazing now. When they were working on something at Lockheed, which by the way, good evidence of this, they were in the DARPA's Alpha Dogfight competition with this ragtag group of software engineers at Lockheed, and they overperformed everybody except one. They took second place out of like 60 companies, and they were probably on a quarter of the budget of the startups that had been funded in that competition. So that's pretty interesting, right? So when they went and they left Lockheed and formed their own company, we were intrigued by that, right? So I think it comes back to people, right? Like the primes are, if the prime decides, if Booz Allen decides, if Brian McCarthy finds 4 or 5 of the most talented engineers at Booz Allen and puts them on a project and gives them access to Booz's engine, better believe they're going to be dangerous in the space. But if it's some second-tier group of people, and those people exist as well, then that's ripe picking for startup land.
Some great words of wisdom in this panel. To close us out, specifically for the students and young professionals in the audience who are interested in working in defense tech or investing in defense tech or even founding a defense tech company, words of advice, things to keep in mind.
Each of those things I'd give different words to.
Let's do working in defense tech.
Working in defense tech. If you want to work because you're patriotic and you want to get in, like I'd go work at, an Anduril, frankly. If you're working because you want to learn and then start your own company, I'd maybe work at Anduril for a couple years and then go work at a smaller company. But you got to find a job where you're going to have upward mobility, where you're going to learn, and where you're going to be challenged every single day. That's what I would say. So go get internships. There's not as many defense companies on this side of the continent as there are in California. I mean, I'd guess, what do you think, maybe 70 to 80% of
the startups?
Yeah, the startups are all in California.
Especially if you want to work on hardware.
Yeah, especially if you want to work in hardware. It is the magnet. So if you want to work in hardware, like pack up your car and drive west.
Yeah. I can't imagine starting Chariot without the learnings and training I got. You're going to hear from some folks, I think, later today, like Matt Steckman, and some people like Scott Sanders and Gokul. And there's people that are incredible mentors for me. And, being able to, trying to like get a company off the ground and kind of learn how the government works is a pretty challenging thing to do at the same time. Talking about, there are some of those times where like you get a couple chances to fail, but eventually you get blackballed. If you're learning those lessons, as you're also trying to do all the other incredibly hard things of starting a company, it can be challenging. And so, I think to Dan's point, like, take advantage of these great places we have, Palantir, Anduril, these places that are now big enough to invest in young talent. A lot of the challenge of going right into a startup is like, it's so hair on fire that like you don't really have time to invest in kind of training and developing people. So yeah, go work at one of those companies for a couple of years, learn the lessons, get trained, and then kind of start to open your aperture and figure out what you're passionate about.
I might modify something because I think Georgetown in particular is uniquely qualified for one thing: lobbying. If you understand that and you bring that into a defense startup at any stage, you will be light years ahead of other people. Do not ever let people not talk about lobbying. Everyone does it, right? We literally were just comparing notes on our lobbyists. But I can't think of any other school where you could learn that, like how the sausage is made, and then take it. And once you have it on a one-page piece of paper, then you can just replicate this forever. That's the beauty of it. But learning that skill, if you want to start your own business, is tremendously powerful. And I'm glad Trey Stevens finally talks about Anduril's first hire being a lobbyist, because we got to remember that. It's super important.
Yeah. I mean, like if I had to like put my finger on like who's been the most like biggest impact on like Anduril's success, it's like Megan Milam. Like a lot of those like early years of getting the early revenue to build the momentum, to build like was from congressional ads that were $0 in the president's budget, and then like hundreds of millions for the border. And yeah, like I say, go work at Anduril because there is no textbook on this, but I mean, there's courses like uniquely here, and so if you there is no textbook to learn how to do government go-to-market, but I guess there's classes here. So
We don't lobby. We inform members and their staff.
Yeah, if my lobbyist was here, you'd yell at me for not saying the right words, I'm sure.
It is absolutely critical. Don't ignore the staff. The staff do the work. The members raise the money and have to cast the votes. The votes don't matter. What matters is what happens in committee. If you want to work in defense, only 4 committees matter: HACD, SACD, HASC, and SASC. That's not that many members. You can get to know them, know their districts, know their staff, be on top of it. I will add to what you guys said. If you really, really, really care about the space and you think someday you might want to create a company in it, I would consider commissioning or enlisting and actually being part of the mission to start your career. Spend 4 years, be an end user, realize that you can't even check your fucking email. It takes you 40 minutes to log in. You've logged in under somebody else's name. Now you need to log in again. You might as well go get a cup of coffee. Like, experience what it is and then go out and change it.
I could not agree more with that statement. You know, I think you have to take a step back and think about what you want to achieve in life. And you know, for me, I'm extra reflective. I turned 50 this year, and I think about my journey. And from 18 to 31, I was in uniform. And I got to be in Iraq, and I got to be in Afghanistan, and I got to be in Korea, and I got to be in Germany, I got to be in Italy, and all these things. And it really, it did 2 things for me. It taught me the space, right? Which, for sure, and it taught me about the good and the bad and all the opportunity in the space. It also, frankly, we can get very overly quantitative. It also, my experience as an Army officer, it actually, I think, taught me how to be a better peer, leader, and follower of people. And, you know, this is not all about dollars and cents. And so don't be in so much of a rush to do that. And please, you know, don't be afraid. By the way, the danger is in today's social media age to be afraid to not, you know, to have the courage to be okay being the 24-year-old, the 26-year-old, the 28, the 30-year-old who's not running their defense tech startup, right? Trust me, I'm one example that there's time, okay? So keep that, that's my takeaway.
Thank you all so much.